have never desired your good opinion.
People fear what they do not understand.
I have a headache, a badge, and a gun.
Power is yours.
Behave.
I was just trying to start a conversation.
And share the wonders I've seen.
This episode of The Wonders I've Seen was recorded prior to news of the cancellation of the show One Day at a Time. I wish that the show had had another chance to fix some of the problems that I point out in this episode, and who knows, maybe it'll get picked up. Because while it was somewhat problematic, it was also one of the few representations of Cuban Americans that's actually available anywhere. So listen to the episode, let me know your thoughts. I appreciate your feedback on YouTube or at me directly on Twitter. Thanks. Hi, and welcome to The Wonders I've Seen, where there's no such thing as weird or normal, there's just different. I'm your host, Tanagra, and today we'll be talking about One Day at a Time. Confusing fave. Today, my liquid nourishment is nothing. Well, I mean, I'm drinking water because everybody should stay hydrated. Drink your 8 ounces a day, but yeah, I'm just having water. This is going to be a short episode, so let's get into it. All right. So last week, rather 2 weeks ago when I was supposed to release an episode, I simply tweeted out, no episode today, watch One Day at a Time and Dragon Prince and ... May. I'll talk about Dragon Prince on another episode, but today I'm going to focus on my lukewarm reception to Etapa 2, Season 2 of One Day at a Time. So if you look back at my tweets from when Etapa 1, Season 1 was out, I loved this show. I think it represents something that we haven't seen very often on network television. And while this is not on network television, it's on, in all honesty, an even better broadcaster, Netflix. So it has a wider range. And looking through some of the comments, because I do follow Gloria Calderon on Twitter, I mean, she has viewers in every single Latin country overseas. I think there's even somebody from like Germany who was commenting on how much they love the show. So if you want to show something different and display a different viewpoint of life in the States, then Netflix is the way to go. And as somebody who identifies as Latinx, and as somebody who is of Cuban descent, I was ridiculously excited to hear about this show. I was already emotionally invested, as one tends to be when you're a POC, when you're a woman of color and somebody's like, I will represent you to the masses at large and I will possibly do it accurately because I'm not a white person trying to do this and steal your culture. And then you're like, yay, let's watch it. And so that's what I did. I watched One Day at a Time and I loved it. I loved the kids. I loved the mom. I loved the grandmother who had come over from Cuba and her struggles and her trauma dealing with that. I love the fact that Penelope was a strong single mom who could deal with having an alcoholic husband who like she used to be so in love with, and going through that and still trying to be a supportive mom and still succeeding in being a supportive and present mom for her children, and being a present daughter as well, and being so filial. I liked that the kids were actually kids and they weren't just stereotypes of what you would expect, because in all honesty, there really aren't enough representations of just children of color being children on television. And this is whether you're talking, once again, digital media is obviously better. Netflix is a big leader in that area. But like, you just don't see it that often. And yes, I can cite Blackish, of course, but I mean, without Cosby Show, there would be no Blackish. Let's just be really honest about that. And yes, there obviously have been shows in between them, but Cosby was really the first one where you got to see a different side of what it meant to be Black American. You didn't have to be working class. Not that it's bad to be working class, but that there's actually a diversity of portrayals. And I feel that this is what One Day at a Time is. It's allowing a diversity of portrayals, allowing the audience to feel like they can become a member of the Alvarez family, that they understand them. And I think this is also where some of the hesitation and questioning One Day at a Time as a favorite comes in. A few years back, Eddie Huang wrote a novel about growing up as the children of immigrants in Florida, and how, since there wasn't a large Asian community, he clung to Black American culture. This is actually something that you see in a lot of first generation Asian Americans, and now it's even being exported. But we'll talk about the anti-Blackness at the same time as the desire to emulate Black American culture in amongst Asians in another episode. Not today, but he talks about his history of, or rather, his childhood growing up as being the minority, and how Black American culture was basically what he clung to, because when nobody else is like you, look for anybody who's different and you find that commonality. And ultimately this became a best-selling novel. He quit his job as an attorney, blah, 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 blah. It got sold and it became the show Fresh Off the Boat. And Eddie Huang talked about how he felt that they had, I don't want to say whitewashed, but genericized the novel. They had made it a bit more palatable to the average American viewer. And as we all know, the average American viewer is white middle America. Especially when you're talking about any of the basic channels, over air channels, such as NBC, ABC, CBS, right? It's white middle America. And when you talk about a show appealing to white middle America, you also have to realize that it can't be quite as critical of white culture, of the majority of the masses, as you might want it to be. And Eddie Huang expresses his distaste with how the show sort of made itself more palatable to, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, the common white person. And he didn't care for it. But at the same time that he didn't care for how they changed his story, he also understood the necessity for it. That in order to be the first, in order to be the one to break down that barrier, you in some ways have to not necessarily perpetuate the stereotypes, but maybe play into them. You have to play the person of color for the laughs, right? So you can have like your serious conversations about racism and things like that, but make sure to end it on a joke. And he didn't care for that. And I understand completely where he was coming from with that, because I've watched the show, and I grew up watching a lot of older Black American television, and I've watched the progression of what Black Americans are quote unquote allowed to be when we're on TV. And I'm talking about all the way back from the Jeffersons to the Cosbys to Hanging with Mr. Cooper to Bernie Mac, all the way up. I won't include Girlfriends in that, because Girlfriends is not a family comedy, but all the way to what we have now, which is Blackish, which in itself comments on the idea of what it means to be Black, and plays on the social expectations of what it means to be Black American. And I think it's interesting that Fresh Off the Boat, as a representation of the Asian American community, hasn't gotten there. They're still sort of having to deal with the expectations of white culture and playing to that and being quote unquote acceptable. And I see that mirrored in what One Day at a Time is doing. And this is not to say that One Day at a Time is a bad show, but simply that it doesn't address a lot of the issues that I think it would if it was actually just allowed to be. There are a lot of issues in the community, and I think One Day at a Time has done a good job of trying to address some of those, like the fear of immigration, like the issues and how the Latinx community deals with LGBTQIA issues. The sort of tradition, for lack of a better way to say, are the of like machismo, but not just like machismo as in the Latin community, but also just as toxic masculinity and the human community as a whole. So all these issues have been brought up, and they've been talked about and they've been laughed about, but I think that for me, that is the issue, that they are laughed about, that everything ends with a joke on a punchline, and a lot of issues that need more nuance, that need to be more delved into, that should be, 2-episode arc rather than we're going to talk about this for 5 minutes and then it's over, such as when they dealt with the issue of Elena and her girlfriend being called at and catcalled when they were walking down the street holding hands, and then it went into toxic masculinity and then consent. Like, it was literally just like a 5 minutes of, oh, we got catcalled, it was really scary, then Alex being like, oh man, that's really bad, and then Penelope being like, yeah, but how do you even know? I feel bad for guys these days. And then Elena being like, no, they should learn to ask, and then everybody apologizing, and then like, okay, we solved it. And I was like, whoa, wait, what? Like, what just happened there? That was not a real conversation. That's not how this would go down. You didn't teach him anything. And having watched the entire season, like, that never really comes up or is mentioned again, like how he should be aware. And I say how Alex should be aware, because every time there's something that's sort of social commentary or any sort of quote unquote SJW, social justice warrior issue, it's always out of the mouth of the lesbian, not very feminine, at least that's how they try to portray her, although she's feminine as fuck, Elena, right? So she always has to be the activist one. She always has to be the forward-thinking one. She always has to be the one educating people. And of course, she's the dull one. And of course, she's the nerd. And of course, she only cares about school. And of course, like, it's just more stereotypes on type of stereotypes on type of stereotypes. It's her as a woman, as her as a aware woman, of her as a woman of color, lesbian, like all of that stuff. And I think that that's problematic, but at the same time that I say that, I also understand that it's necessary to make these comments come out of the mouth of a child, of a dorky child who's viewed as non-threatening, than to come out of the mouth of Penelope, who is the PTSD, depression suffering veteran mom, who it might seem a bit more aggressive to other people. In the same way, I also understand that that's also why they probably haven't dealt with the issue of colorism in the Latinx community. I spent, before making this podcast, an hour going through all of Gloria Calderon's tweets, trying to find this one Twitter exchange from I guess it was last year or 2017, 2018, where somebody tweeted her about whether or not she'd be including Black Latinx representation in season 2 when the show came back. And she was very enthusiastic about it, and there wasn't any. Like, there wasn't any. They didn't talk about it. When they talked, even last season, in season 1, when they talked about colorism within the family, which is something that, an episode that she cited before, they didn't talk about it. And when you're talking about the Cuban community, and literally the 2 most popular Cubans that Americans know, and at least in the States, are Gloria Estefan, who has been on the show, and Celia Cruz, who is like very much Black Latin, it's infuriating to a certain extent that they don't talk about it, that they at least don't have a Black Latinx friend, like that they don't have somebody. They had an entire freaking family reunion and nobody in the family was Black. And I'm not saying that every Cuban family has a Black person, but like, there's a range of skin tones in Latin families. The same way there are in a lot of other minority cultures. Like, not everybody's the exact same skin tone. And the fact that they didn't even try, or even have just like not even a family member, but a guest at the funeral be Black and have a line or two to say, like, that would have been amazing. Like, in going through the tweets and reading through her Twitter history, I saw the people who were touched by the show, who were like, oh my God, thank you for showing mental illness and how to deal with it. Thank you for trying to normalize mental illness in the Latinx community. Thank you for trying to normalize LGBTQIA issues in the Latinx community. Thank you for letting me know that I'm not the only one who has to deal with these issues with my mom, helping her deal with her trauma, dealing with my trauma. Thank you for showing what it's like for a veteran to struggle with coming back from overseas. Like, I saw these people who see this show when they see themselves in it, and I don't. Like, I don't watch the show because I see myself in it. And that's neither here or there, but I do think that it's sort of problematic that one of the main reasons why I don't see myself in these characters, and by all means, if I was like somebody, I definitely would be more Elena than anybody else on this show, is that it once again represents for me how the Latinx community tries to act like there aren't Black Latins. And I see this all the time in Western entertainment. I see this all the time in the States. I see this all the time with when people talk about, beautiful Latinas, and everybody looks like that same cafe, not even cafe con leche, probably lighter color. And they're like, this is what Latinas look like. And you're like, no, we don't. We're a range. We're a span of skin tones. And I think for me, it's just like, once again, when you have an international platform, when you finally have a Latinx woman in charge, she simply perpetuates the same stereotypes and colorism that is so prevalent in our community. And it's not even upsetting. It's just unsurprising. And like, you could do better, but I'm also not surprised that you didn't. So I'll keep watching one day at a time. I know what it has to be. I know who it has to appeal to. And I also know though that that's not me, because whether or not it appeals to me, they know that I would watch it. They know that I would support it. Because that's what POC and particularly women of color do. Just like all the women who sat through Siempre Bruja because they kept hoping it would get better, and it didn't. Shit was racist as fuck. But you know what Netflix got? Ratings and eyes on a racist as fuck show. So I don't know if one day at a time will get better. I will keep hoping it will, but also, like, I've been around several decades at this point, and I know the desire and propensity of the Latinx community to erase Black Latinx peoples and act like we don't exist and that we're not a part of their culture or a part of their history. So, tell me how you feel about One Day at a Time. Do you see the pluses and the positives and the minuses as well? Do you think the pluses and what it accomplishes for the representation of Latinx in the States, and I say the States because it is a very specific culture of itself, outweighs what it fails to do as representing the entirety of the Latinx experience and cultural range? Yeah, let me know your thoughts. I'm interested. Or do you think that it just doesn't matter and we should be happy that they're acting like Cubans exist in the States anyway, outside of Miami? So that's all the wonders that I have for you today. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at Tanagra GGNOC. That's TANAGRAGGNOC. You can also hit me up on email at ggnoctanagra@gmail.com. That's ggnoctanagra@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts. Send me your links. Send me articles. I love reading those. Send me what you would want to hear me talk about in the future. That's all the wonders that I have for you today. Make choices and don't fall it up.